My name is Dorothe Helen. I'm a professor at the business school here in Bodø, Nordland University. My background is mainly within studies of different experience sectors in Norway and other countries, focused on innovation, value creation, and sustainability in particular. And Indigenous and Sámi experiences are sometimes part of that. While this particular study that I'm presenting today, which is a very much work in progress because I'm in the middle of analyzing, focus entirely on Sámi experiences. So this is more focused on that. So what you see in the left side here is a picture from one of the study trips where I bring my students both from bachelor and master level. I used to bring them to visit because Sámi experiences is an important part, which they also should learn about when I have courses on experiences. So the background. Many argue, including UN, that experience sectors like tourism and other visitor experiences have a big potential for sustainable impact if one do it in the right way. For example, to revitalize culture, to revitalize and take care of nature. Of course, it can also be the opposite if one do it in the wrong way and focus entirely on mass tourism and growth and not taking care of the relations around one. In Norway, we got a new tourism strategy last year where they pinpointed that Sámi experiences was one of the main potential in Norway to develop because it's still rather undeveloped. It's mainly in the most northern county, Finnmark, that it really has been developed over a long time. For example, in this county, in Nordland, it's still rather few that contribute with Sámi experiences. And also, for example, during the pandemic, one experienced in Canada that one had a significantly increased interest in Indigenous experiences. Of course, people couldn't travel outside of their own country, but in a way that they discovered it's really something interesting here that we also, that our domestic should learn more about. And I think this is really something that can inspire also in Norway and other countries, that often we see that the citizens in the same country and even the same county doesn't really know about the Indigenous cultures within the close nearby area. And for example, Bodø, which is to be the cultural capital in 2024, they have a vision of contributing somehow to the rewriting of the story about the Sámi people and culture in Norway, because it's still often very unknown by most common people. But there are several knowledge gaps, and some of them which I want to address here is how can one do co-creation? How can one do sustainability in cultural tourism? And the other part of it is, of course, the tradition of colonizing still creates several challenges also for experiences, creating ethical dilemmas, contributing to stereotypes and too little diversity in the experience. They are too similar in a way because one cannot really go out of the box in a way. So there is a lot of potential, but also challenges. So I have chosen a research question asking how are Sámi experience organizations co-creating value and sustainability transformation? And what are the main potential and challenges? When I talk about co-creation here, I particularly address the interaction between the organization or the tour guide, for example, in interactions with the visitors. It could also, of course, be other kind of co-creation with other organizations, for example, an institution, but here it's particularly the focus between the firm, organization and the visitor. So what is the theoretical framework? Of course, we have to look at how to understand what is experiences in this context. And what we mean then is often meaningful, memorable experiences that is something extraordinary from the ordinary everyday life. And often the value that is created we don't focus particularly on the functional of solving a problem. That's not why we go on experiences. It's not like when you go to the dentist to fix your teeth. It is more like you want to experience something else that can bring you some new meaning, learning, something social or emotional, often also related to life quality, because we all have leisure time and holidays or other part of our life that is not only functional. So that is central kind of user value. We also can talk about how can one work with experience design, because that is how can you actually really facilitate value for others related to such a thing like experiences. And there are many different methods, and here you see one model that includes some of the main methods. Storytelling is a very central part of that. And of course, interactions, different kind of interactions with animals, with objects, with people, with yourself, for example. So that's part of the concept of experience design. And one often look at the customer journey. What do you do to prepare before you go? What happens during the visit and what happens after? Storytelling has been studied in many kind of approaches. We particularly here address it as a kind of practice-based knowing, closely related also, of course, to tacit knowing. But some have, from before, addressed Sámi tourism and culture related to story. And for example, a literature review argued that one has to be very careful about what stories to tell, what stories not to tell, and how can you tell it? Because it's very much integrated into the worldview, the broader practice of culture, like the Sámi culture. Sustainability equally, one also have to address, and well, I suppose you know that it can be addressed by focusing on particularly the three core dimensions of economic, social, and environmental, and related to UN's goals, sustainability goals. There are, of course, other perspectives also focusing particularly on resource preservation, for example. Some focus much on community-based. How can we create better interactions in a community? Others mainly on developing new kind of products, for example. One also talk about weak and strong sustainability. The typical mainstream approach, particularly on a business school where I come from, has been, it's not only today, but has been very much focused on economy, growth, competition, while today more and more we see the potential of cooperation and having other kind of balancing of the three main domains. And for example, some of my colleagues working within ecological economy say that at economy only is one of the tools toward getting a good society and taking care of the environment. So a stronger views on sustainability is becoming more and more central. And that we also can see within Sámi tourism and culture, arguing that mass tourism is not a way to go within Sámi experiences and tourism. So what is the method of this study? It's mainly based on semi-structured interviews with Sámi experience firms. Some of them also have a kind of a role as a cultural governance organization. There has been one group interview, there has been some observations, some participative observations, and some more kind of distance observations and documents. So as I said, I'm in the middle of analyzing it now. So this is preliminary findings that you will get. So interviews is done all with Norwegian companies, from Trøndelag and up to Finnmark. Observation has also been done in Sweden on a study trip, actually with Norwegian Sámi companies going to Sweden, visiting Swedish companies and trying out their experience products. So that's quite interesting. So it's a kind of mixture of, some are totally within nature-based experiences like fishing, hunting, hiking. Others are totally in culture-based, like within museums. Many actually have food included somehow, or it's a main meal experience with some storytelling. Very often it's a kind of mixture. So that's some of the background. So what are some of the preliminary findings related first to co-creation and storytelling? What we find, first of all, is that many argue that storytelling is the basis of our culture. Some argue that it's almost all 45%, 40% of what we do, but we don't do it all the time. We do it mostly in the evenings, for example, because in the daytime we do other kind of work. So many argue that storytelling has for long been a very central way of educating our youngsters. And of course, it's a way of processing and remembering as well. So, and one can argue that in a way, storytelling connect with other kind of activities. It bring in senses in a way, but through interesting stories, for example, but also it weaves together the objects, the animals, the other people. So it's a kind of binding together and creation of meaning using storytelling. Also, we see that storytelling is not the only thing if you are to co-create, because if you take it very extreme, you can say that storytelling can pacify people because they only have to listen. While co-creation, we see more and more, both in the general literature on experiences, but also many of these informants argue that we see that people want to participate more and more. Value is created more often if they actually can participate and not only watch and listen. Maybe we see that with our students also. They want to be more interactive. So here you see a picture from some of my students when we had a visit, when they were invited to make the bread with some berries within. And that they really remember after, because they were involved more. So you can say, in a way, you can watch people making food, for example. That can be a more kind of passive interaction and co-creation. You can be involved directly in dialogues. Many have a lot of questions. Many of the organizations also argue that we cannot have a fixed manus that we talk from. We just have some themes. And then we need to be flexible related to who are the people. What do they know from before? What do they want to know? Many has a lot of questions. So it's more like having these themes in the backhand and then be more interactive. And also in a way, it must be adapted to the single person. The guide, for example, you cannot have a standard kind of a team or even, because some people have more personal knowledge and dedication to some topics, which is important to bring in. So maybe the wife in the family tell a little bit a different story than the husband in the family, for example, because they feel more sure, they have more knowledge on that topic. Many of them also argue that storytelling is very locally situated. As, for example, one woman said, I could not go from my place to Røros, another part of the country, and tell my story. I need my things, I need my land around me in order to actually be able and comfortable to talk about it, because I want to show also it's a kind of mixture in a way. And many also argue that, of course, it depends also on the Sámi language, which some argue, and it depends on knowledge of the Sámi culture, which some does actually argued when they started working on Sámi experiences, they lacked knowledge. They needed to really go to their families, relatives, and ask and explore to get more knowledge to build up a good Sámi experience. and find the good places, for example, to go to use as a kind of experience scape. And many of them also argue that it's very central that, for example, if they work with reindeer herding, is very central for them if they are to talk about reindeers, that they actually have this personal living cultural knowledge. And it's not only something others have told them, in order to really feel that they feel confidence with it, and in a way. But of course, there are challenges related to experience economy, and it is related to storytelling, particularly, and interaction with visitors, because some say that when they first started doing Sámi experiences, they felt almost that they were selling their own culture, almost feeling like prostituted in a way, because they didn't feel confidence. They felt that they were objectified. People come to take picture of them, to look at them from the outside. But I think what most of them tell now, after they have worked more on their own Sámi culture, after they have in a way found their own role, it's more like a going into it as an interaction, as people can ask questions, they can interact, they can have a dialogue, they can in a way share something, they co-create it. So the co-creation, instead of the more kind of staging approach, is much better, many of them argue, because then you give me something, I give you something, and we have a more like a kind of interactive dance. I don't become objectified in the same way. So, but also they of course say that you have to find a balance. It's often very personal to do Sámi experiences. So you need to find a balance, what to tell and what to not to tell, and how to tell it. Many also face stereotypes from visitors, from destination marketing organization, for example. What should a Sámi experience be? Is it only lavvo, kofte, and the reindeer? It's not all Sámi people that want to do Sámi experiences that do reindeer herding. There are a lot of other activities that is related to Sámi experiences that should contribute to more kind of local differentiated products also, so they don't exactly are the same. So if you have been on one Sámi experience, you don't need to go to a new one because they are all the same. It's more important to show more of the diversity of it, so people can come and have different kind of experiences also. And of course, it is more diverse and not have this stereotyping. So some actually struggle with that, because some visitors come, where is the lavvo? I expect to see the lavvo, and they don't get the lavvo. So you need to work more upfront to tell that Sámi experience or Sámi culture are much more than only the lavvo in a way. Some also have problems, of course, with language, lacking, finding the good words of Sámi, or finding being able to work with English when they have international visitors. When it comes to sustainability, almost, I think, all of the informants argue that the Sámi culture have this very special kind of relational nature-based being in the world, a kind of worldview that is the basis for the practicing, and therefore are integrated with a lot of sustainability, particularly related to nature, the environmental. So I will not repeat all. You see some of the quotes here. For example, harvesting, picking berries. If you kill an animal, you use all part of it. You don't only take the loins, as some do with fish, for example. You use all part of it, even the blood. So that, in a way, is integrated into the culture, this part of it. So there is definitely many potentials and strengths related to the culture of Sámi practices for communicating and educating other people on sustainability, because many people today are so urbanized. They can hardly move in the forest. They don't have this respect and the knowledge and care for nature in the same way, which my grandmother, that was not a Sámi, she also did much of this way of interacting and using all resources when they killed an animal. But I think most of modern people have never learned it, or they have forgotten it or left it. And I think many of the Sámi experiences can actually remind us or learn us again about how we can actually practice so that it can transform the visitors and at least start making them interested and curious about alternative ways of practicing. It's not only about sorting out the plastic and the garbage, it's so much more. So it's very much interesting part here. But of course, also Sámi companies can work on becoming more sustainable on some areas. But we see also that often the interactions with visitors can make them proud. It has contributed to more knowledge for many of them. So it has actually also contributed to a stronger culture and sustainability. So I have tried to work on a little figure, as you see here. So in a way, you can say nature contributed with resources to the culture and resources to economy, but also the culture contributed with important resources for the experience economy. So they are intertwined, but actually having visitors, doing the experience economy also contribute positively back to the culture. So it is a connection. And the uniqueness here, I think, often is that the culture have this unique care, sustainability for nature in particular, but also the traditions of how to, in a way, educate and work on the culture, for example, through storytelling, is also very much appealing and good match to experience economy. But of course, one can argue, is it so that all Sámi cultures are so nature-based, so sustainable? Of course, Sámi cultures are also diverse. So it's not all that are. Some use helicopters, it's a lot of snowmobiles, it's all this equally environmental sustainability, one can argue. And of course, also many, they argue that the experience, the tourism, for example, activities must be balanced with other diverse income, because many of them are reindeer herders as the main, or they do also other kind of income. So it's a kind of balancing, finding a good balance. It's a kind of multitasking. And of course, the Sámi culture is not in a vacuum. It's also part of a bigger picture. So what we see here, for example, if you look more closely at the challenges, is that the colonizing is still hampering not only the Sámi culture, but also related to experience economy. Lack of knowledge is a typical part of it. Also, starting working with tourism and experiences also is a good motivation to start learning more about own culture. Many argue about the tradition of feeling shame about the Sámi culture. Some argue that, before we have for so many years had to hide our cultural background to feel ashamed about it, never put it out in the public area. It's a kind of private backstage kind of activity. And when you are to work within experience economy, you're actually to visualize it, put it up front, try to explore it, try to exploit it. So it's a very big turnaround in a way to do this for some. And that can also explain why some in the beginning felt almost like selling or being prostituted on their behalf of their own culture. So it needs to be, you need to work on it in a more personal way. And of course, not all Sámi sub-practices are equally sustainable, and everybody can, of course, improve. But there is also some argue that it's a lack of traditions to cooperate between companies, and there is definitely increasing areal conflicts around related to mining, wine mills, second home building, and whatever. So it's many that actually some of the reindeer herders argue that Sámi cultures the reindeer herding at least is becoming less sustainable due to lack of food, due to different kind of challenges. And that also, of course, influence tourism in somehow. There are many kind of regulations. You cannot use the blood in food, for example, which is a tradition of the Sámi culture. Here you see a picture of the blood pancake, which is a delicatessen for many that I really would love to serve, but then maybe you have to buy the blood from Finland or something. You cannot get it in Norway that you can use in serving. So I will try to sum up. As I said, this is a work in progress, so I will not really have a discussion and conclusion at this moment, but try to sum up a little bit. One thing for sure is that Sámi experiences definitely can be attractive, and there is a big potential here. And particularly, I think, is this the connection of the importance of storytelling, the traditions of storytelling, how it can actually contribute in the bigger co-creation with visitors, but also communicate and increase the meaning of how one can do sustainable practices. And working with the experience economy and production actually also contribute to sustainability for Sámi people, because it increases the knowledge, it can increase the proud, it contributes also for Sámi youngster to learn more about their own culture. So it is not only for the visitors. We see there is a good connection there. At the same time, of course, experience, production, and design is very much integrated into the bigger Sámi nature-based culture. There is the core resources, and there is how one need to find a good balance in a way. And we see then that working on experience economy can contribute in the regenerative rewriting of Sámi culture in a country. So there is some good, it's not only that you harvest the resources, but you can contribute with something back. Also, we should not forget that neither do the experience or the Sámi culture live in a kind of vacuum. It's integrated into a bigger picture. And I think many of these tensions, which is expressed, come from that. I have only addressed some core challenges here with this triangular. One thing is this coping, the tradition of colonizing, of hiding, how they can cope in a good way, finding a good balance so they are comfortable with it and finding, but also on the second challenge, how to find a good balance of how much they should do that and compared to other income areas. Actually, some of them argue that since we have this multi-income, we have managed the pandemic better than others, because we could actually then lean on some of the other feet that we have. We have many feet to stand out. But a really big tension, which I see some of you are going to talk about during this conference, is this tension with other sectors and the growth paradigm and the, you know, all these other kind of word philosophies or practices that clashes with the Sámi culture. But I think what I would end it with is this question that you see in the left side here, because the UN's SDGs number 17 is very much occupied about the need of having more broader partnership and cooperation. So we should not see the broader environment only as a kind of threat. Is there no really potential that could be used in a good way? I think so. And one of these is how Sámi culture can learn other sectors on being more sustainable. At least that is a start. So what we will do now is, of course, to write it up. Probably it will be 2 papers. We're also working on a research application with Sámi organizations, which some of these can serve as a kind of background for. So questions, comments? Thank you very much.
Are there any questions or comments? We lost some minutes there in the beginning, so I think we have a couple of minutes for questions.
I don't know if there
See if
is
there's
anyone in the out there.
I can make a comment. I think it was really interesting presentation, and I really liked kind of how you used also this kind of guest relationship, which is kind of, because it has also to do with kind of how to be a good guest, but also how to be a host and how to teach people to be a good guest within this Sámi context. I think that it's really interesting, kind of the contrast between certain parts of this Sámi-based tourism industry that you describe, and also this almost kind of predatory like tourism industry that we see, for example, in certain parts of Finland and also Russia and other areas where kind of this lack of a host-guest relationship and lack of connection to local Sámi communities and Sámi values. How do you think kind of the work that you're doing and the work that the people that you have interviewed can contribute to changing the tourism industry?
Yeah, on the bullet points, what it said, not all Sámi practices are equally sustainable. One of the examples that often come up, for example, some mention that in some areas, for example, in Finland, they use people from Poland to be the guides, which they see that is totally not acceptable. So there are, and that goes back also to this importance of having the living culture within your body, in a way, having the personal knowledge of how things are, and not only tell from a kind of manus. Because the less knowledge you have, the more you must build on a manus that somebody has written for you and verified in a way. So, and also this mass tourism thing is, all are arguing that it should be more low scale, it should be more interactive, and not only be this mass production of big groups standing there, because then it becomes more objectified. It's not a real interaction if it becomes such a big group, and then it can also very easily be more strenuous for the persons working and the nature and the culture. So it's less sustainable on these matters. For example, some of these informants argue that they don't want to use the word tourist, they use the word guest or participant, because some even put them in to help them with the reindeer and migration. So you can live with them. Of course, that's the most extreme kind of a cool creation. But yeah, mass tourism is definitely something everybody say, we don't want that. It should be a kind of interaction. So thank you very much.
Thank you.